So welcome back everybody to our fourth and final conversation. It's a great week so far, and I'm sure our last conversation is going to be even more lively and full of ideas and discussion and support for one another. Thank you for joining us. Focus on the eSwatini case study. We're going to be hearing from a few student groups who have got some things to share with us in relation to what their thoughts are on the case study. And then we'll be opening the floor to all of you. So even if you had not had a chance yet to contribute in the campus to a group, you can feel free to contribute at this discussion. We're recording the call, so if you do happen to have to drop off or your internet connection drops or you want to share the conversation with everyone, you'll be able to do so via our YouTube channel, and also we'll share the links on campus. And when you have something to contribute, you can do it in two ways, either to raise up your hand and Nawazi and I will come round to seeing you and asking your questions, or you can pop your messages into the chat. So really excited to hear what you all have to say. Thanks again to David and Nawazi for joining me. It's been a great week so far. I'm pleased to have you both on the call. And now I'm going to hand over to Nawazi, who's going to be the main facilitator for today. So over to you, Nawazi.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction and the housekeeping. Before I get to the groups, I see that our presenters haven't joined the call yet, so they'll be joining us soon. I just want to give a bit of an overview of today. Sarah's highlighted that we'll be focusing on the presentations, and also mentioned to you that we've already posted up the recordings for the previous calls we've had during the week and on campus, and we've got some discussion questions there for you as well. So please log in and take a look at those discussion questions. We're eager to hear your thoughts and see your answers and respond to those as well. So if you have any questions regarding those recordings, if you can't access them, we've also got an alternative link, but they should be easily accessible as we've also posted them on our YouTube link, and Sarah has shared those links with you. So we have two groups today, one with Beryl, who will be presenting on their behalf and introduce their group. I see she's already logged in on the call. I'm not sure if Kay is on as well. She, I think, will be presenting for the other group, or they can message either Sarah and myself to let us know who will be presenting on their behalf. So before, as I continue, then I'll hand over to Beryl and suggest that she can start her presentation. Beryl, you can share your screen if you'd like to present to us. So before I give her the floor, I just want to remind you of the key focus of our case study this week. So we've had some talks this week. Monday, we introduced the eSwatini case study, and we had a discussion with PDA from the Central Bank of eSwatini. And then on Tuesday, we looked at MOSIP and Open ID platforms and the case studies that they've worked on. Then yesterday, we were joined by Yanis, who's also here today with us. And he spoke to us about the potential of mobile and leveraging that for digital identity, and advising you and running through that thread of eSwatini so that you keep it in mind as you're working through the case study to help you answer the key questions, which were, what pathway do you suggest that the central bank should follow in implementing the eKYC scheme? And also looking at conducting a SWOT analysis so that they can take a look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on their roadmap that would better advise them to make sure they avoid any pitfalls they may not have foreseen in advance, and help them better plan and have better successful outcomes in this project. So Beryl, I'd like to hand over to you, and you can present for your group.
That's okay.
Yourself and your group members, and then you can continue with your presentation. Thank you so much for participating, and I'm excited to hear what you have for us today.
Great, I'll share my screen. This one should be the right one, I believe. Yeah. So we were in a group with Tarira, with Indrakshi and Edward, and we had quite some communication over the last 2 days, sending WhatsApp up and down, having some calls, etc., to look at this assignment. So firstly, we look at this roadmap. It's quite full. That's why we created some colors, where we see the first part of the roadmap is the scope and the buy-in, where you already have told us about several actions you have taken, like having dialogue with stakeholders, where we think those could be formalized. You have an existing map of ID documents and the ecosystem around that, but we see that that maybe might be tied into your use cases, which you've told us a little bit about, like ghost employees and things like that. But I think that could be a little bit more detailed, assess them and prioritize them and add them into that digital ecosystem. And then the next step for buy-in that your government says, yes, we should be doing this, we believe is a cost and manpower estimation. So like if you go into this journey, you know what's up. And then the next step is the orange is more product development, which has to do with risk assessment and mitigation strategies, with creating a future-proof eKYC concepts, and also looking into the choice between proprietary eID solutions or private parties, and those kind of things, to really have a robust idea of what you want to build. And at the meantime, also already developing regulatory environments. You told us in the call yesterday that there are some privacy bills going to pass, which would tie in with that nicely. But we also see an assurance framework that needs to be in place. And once that is developed well enough, we think you should move on to the next phase, which is the implementation, is think about your distribution and marketing plan. How are you going to onboard all these people in eSwatini, and how will they be aware that it's important to have eKYC, and get your system integrations in place, and then do a first test with like a small batch of people, and then move on for a full rollout. Then, and my team members, if you have something to comment, please do so. Then we have the next slide from the SWOT. If we look at strength, from a customer point of view, it is that because of the Vela SIM registration that's already there, or maybe have your national ID that might already be in place, like for 70%, it'd be very easy for customers to have an eKYC, that not every time you want to open anything, you have to go through all these steps. And it can also lead to reduction in fraud if you have to log in through eKYC when you get financial services. From the viewpoint of financial service providers, yeah, it's easy if they want to do new things if an eKYC is already in place. And mobile phone ownership is 88%, so a lot of people could match that. And from the point of the central bank, the privacy bill has already been submitted to Parliament, and that's the first step in setting up the legal framework. Yeah, the stakeholders we also talked about in the roadmap. Weaknesses, we see weaknesses for using the existing consumer information databases is that they require proof of address, a lot of these existing databases, so 70% would already be excluded because they're a rural population and address is not clear, although this is also one of the points you are wanting to solve, as you told us. And it doesn't seem like there's been any civil society consultation about risk associated with implementing eKYC or privacy, etc. So that is a step that's still important to take. From the viewpoint of financial services, yes, we thought data integrity might be a weakness because some of the databases might be compromised, and somebody else can take somebody's data, and that would lead to duplication, etc. So we see some issues there. And from the point of the central bank, the databases that are existing might be fragmented and present a lot of complexities and variances. So matching the several existing databases might be a challenge. And only if you only use existing sources, those who are currently excluded will still be excluded. So that's what we saw as a weakness. So there's still this part of your population that you want to include, which you will not include if you only use existing databases. Opportunities.
Do I take it, Beryl?
Yes, that's good. That's a good idea. Please do.
Thank you. I'm Indrakshi here from India, and I'll take you through the SWOT analysis of opportunities and threats. As we understand that opportunities and threats are the external factors that will affect this existing consumer information database. So when we speak of opportunities for the users or the customers, I guess if the existing data information is taken, the customers will not have to give information every time. That is, they can only once give that information, and that can be processed. So, and they also have a robust customer identification and verification obligations can be done for once and for all. Now, if we come to the opportunities that the DFSPs would have, that is that I said that retrieving the basic consumer information from the database, existing database, would make it less expensive for them. That would reduce their cost, for which I feel that they can provide these services at a lower cost to the customers, which will help them take in even, and we understand that eSwatini is a low-income country, and if they have to take in, cost is one very big thing which they'll have to keep in mind. So if it is a shared database, which reduces the cost to that extent. And for the central bank, we would say that it can enable a third party to access the database. You know, they can share the database for the purpose of electoral requirement. For that is, we are speaking of interoperability here. If it's an interoperable data, it can be used for direct benefit transfers, for health cares, for election purpose, and there's a lot of other use cases that the data can be used. And coming to the threats that that may come out of this proposition is that first, consumers are scary of the security and safety of the data. They feel that if the data is taken from one center and used in another way, there could be a case of unauthorized data use. That could be one big threat for them. And for the DFSPs, the most important threat would be the veracity of the consumer's information that has been collected by the operator, the mobile operator or the existing data. What is the veracity of the information that they have collected? And the data, is it capable of supporting the AML and the CFT requirements? That has to be checked. And for the central bank, once again, we find that eSwatini is still transiting between the rule-based to risk-based AML and CFT requirement. And it is an early stage, so they have to wait for this to absolutely migrate to the risk-based ALM and AFT, for which this data can be used from the existing database. So I think this is what we as a team, Beryl, myself, and Tariro, we have all worked together to find out. Present to you this PPT, and it goes and it would be effective for the CBE also. So thank you from me as well as my team members. Tariro, over to you if you'd like to speak a little.
Oh no, thank you for the great presentation. Thank you. Bye.
Hello,
Thank you very much, Indrakshi. Tariro, will you be making any comments on behalf of your group?
I have no comments.
All right, thank you very much. This was a very useful presentation. I've been noting down some key things because I also had prepared my own model answer, and I'm seeing a lot of similarities and quite a few differences, and I'll just pick those out a bit. I'd like to move on now to the next group, because the way we've structured the call today is after your presentations, myself and Pili Lengumalo, who we had on Monday, we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then I'll hand over to her and David to also give their thoughts and what they've picked up from these presentations as well. So in the next group, they've told me that Dorregos will be presenting on their behalf. So Dorregos, I'd like to give the floor to you. Please introduce the members of your team, and you can take the floor. Thank you very much. Dorregos? I think while we wait for them, please remember that if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you can pop them in the chat. If we do have time in the call, we'll get to them, or some of them I'll answer when we post up the video for this call with the summary. So please keep those in mind. You can pop them in the chat. When we finish with the group presentations, you can raise your hand, and if we have time, we'll give you the time to ask your questions. So Dorregos, please continue and present on behalf of your group. Thank you.
I still have some few things to input, and I don't think that's enough points to go through. Let's see if we could still have some time to buy.
Sorry?
Can you still give me some time, please?
Oh, okay. Are you guys still finalizing your presentation?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, no worries. I think what I'll do then is, let me share my screen, and then I'll take you through the answers I had thought of. They are a bit general, but I'll specify in my speaking how it exactly affects Eswatini. I've mentioned in some of the points where it touches on strategies or vision, some of the visions in Eswatini and how everything links up together. I'm just trying to find the window. Okay. So I had a very short and not as elaborate plan as the other team on their pathway. So my thoughts were in starting this project, it would need some internal consultation within the central bank before starting with outside stakeholders, as they need to make sure that the consultation they conduct and the framework, the guidelines they'll draft are in line with all the different departments within the central bank that will be affected by the eKYC scheme or project. So those would include the AML, the bank supervision, the exchange control, the fintech side, as Beryl's team mentioned, the innovation possibilities that may come from the eKYC database being interoperable, and then conduct a contextual research to understand what Eswatini currently looks like, so that they can draft the guidelines specifically to our context. Because we can see in history that a lot of developing countries tend to take regulations from the advanced world and then copy and paste per se to their country context without necessarily adjusting it to fit exactly what is going on in their country. Like with the example of Eswatini, most of our population is rural, and so that has implications on the infrastructure requirements that might be placed on the central bank and on the digital financial services providers. And then on the next step, they would then conduct a consultative stakeholder engagement process with the drafted guidelines to then now bring in all the external stakeholders, discuss how they think they look at their input, and then continue with them, even conducting, I like the step that Beryl's group included, which was on pilot testing before rolling out the KYC process in Eswatini. So looking at the different strengths, and weaknesses. So the first one that jumped out to me was, yes, increased financial inclusion. This is in line with eSwatini's National Financial Inclusion Strategy from 2017 to 2022. And it will also incentivize customers or end users to keep their money in digital form, especially if now the merchants are also digital, then the value chain is digital and they have no reason to always insist on having cash. Also, it will provide hassle-free access to financial services, because currently the situation is if I'm required to produce my KYC documents to an institution, say I'm taking them to FNB, then I must go and get the exact same documents and take them to Standard Bank. So you have to carry multiple copies of those same documents to different institutions, and eKYC will remove that burden. From the financial services providers, this will result in improved customer satisfaction because of the lowered inconvenience of using their services and better trust, as well as improved transaction monitoring when reporting to the Financial Intelligence Unit in eSwatini. Then from the view of the central bank, as I mentioned before, achieving the financial inclusion goals, improved monitoring, and also increased or wider reach and G2P digitization. And then, but then the weaknesses, then we see that in most developing countries, you find that cash is still king. So as much as we might introduce these eKYC capabilities, individuals might still prefer to use cash because the informal channels are pretty much well developed and they trust them. And there's a potential of initial fees charged because of the implementation requirements that will be required from the DFSPs and the CBE to get this project started before they can realize the long-term goal of the lower costs because of the lower requirements on record keeping and all of that. So that leads to me talking about the high cost and initial rollout and ensuring system integration, or maybe having to add adjustments or investments in their IT infrastructure, especially to reach the rural customers where connectivity is still limited. And both side and the CBE, they need technical training on the technological requirements to successfully implement the eKYC capabilities. Then looking at my opportunities and threats, I've mentioned more convenience, less time, but the one I want to point out is from the viewpoint of the CBE, which is that the opportunity they have now is to update regulations and make them current and more effective for the eKYC. Also reforming the banking sector in line with eSwatini's strategic roadmap for 2019 to 2020, and promote financial literacy, because they'd have to create more awareness for consumers to make use of financial services, as they'd be more aware that these eKYC capabilities exist. Then on the threats, something similar to what Beryl's group mentioned on the data privacy and concern. So then it touches again on the limited customer awareness, where the CBE and the financial institutions would need to actively conduct financial literacy campaigns to let customers know and understand exactly what this means for them. So moving on then to, from the point of view of the CBE, something that Beryl's group also touched on was on quality control of the data used for levels of assurance to make sure that they comply with AML laws, and also data privacy concerns, as the data protection bill has not been gazetted yet and is still before Parliament. But as we heard from Pilile on Monday, the timelines look like they will work well together, where the bill might be gazetted in time when they are planning to launch the project. And other threats may be potential delays in obtaining government approval, as they are also a key stakeholder that needs to be involved in rolling out the eKYC capabilities. So those were my thoughts. And I wonder if Dorregos, you and your team are ready now to present. Beryl, please do send me your PowerPoint slides so that we can share them on campus for everyone else to gain access to. And I ask for the same with Dorregos' team. Please also share your PowerPoint slides with us. You can send them to us via email, and then we will share them with the rest of the participants that will be accessing campus when they view the summary and this recording tomorrow on campus. So Doragos, I hope my time has given you enough time to finish up on your side so that you can give us your thoughts, which I'm eager to also hear. And I'm sure the rest of the participants on this call as well. Doragos, or any of the other team members, Kay, Paul, Mulenga, or Olaleye. Okay, Doragos, you've got your hand up. You can take the floor. You just need to unmute yourself. You're on mute. And you can start your presentation. All right, Dorego says you're not ready yet. I think what we can do is move on to some of the questions I had prepared to ask Pilile from the Central Bank, who's with us here on the call. And then the presentation from the other group will happen after that. Hopefully they'll be ready by then. So I think I'd introduce you again to those points on the call previous on Monday. We have Pilile here with us. She is the General Manager of Finance and the head of the FinTech unit of the Central Bank of eSwatini. And she's been with us on this journey on all the calls from Monday to today, which I'm sad to see is our last day, as I've quite enjoyed these live discussions we've had, and I've also learned quite a bit myself. So welcome, Pilile. I don't know if you want to just quickly say hello and introduce yourself to those who may not have seen you on Monday.
Hello, everybody. It's really great to join you on the call once again. As mentioned, I am Pilile Ngumalo from the Central Bank of eSwatini, and I've had a fantastic week listening to your ideas and your thoughts. I've got pages and pages of notes. Thank you very much for participating.
Yeah, so I think my questions to you are also based around the case study that we've asked the participants to work on. And my first question would be just that, what is your viewpoint on the ecosystem roadmap that you will take towards implementing eKYC capabilities in eSwatini?
Okay, thanks, Nolwazi. So I've had the benefit of listening to the first group present. I've also heard your model answer, and I've also had, sort of my notes that I've been taking as we progress through the week. And there's a common thread really, because there are so many similarities in terms of what might the possible steps we could take could be. And I don't want to sort of be repetitive, but maybe I can just highlight those that sort of resonate with me at this stage. Maybe we had not thought about it, or I've just picked up that it's something that we need to develop or try and address a little bit better than what we had thought. The first of that is sort of the financial literacy aspect of it. I do just pick up that, when we did the FinScope survey, there was a need, I think, identified very clearly there, that there was a level of financial literacy that we needed to arrive to. And certainly when you move towards making services digital, and especially the KYC capability, this is going to be a key point that needs to be addressed. And just mindful of the fact that it's not something that can happen quickly. These are probably activities that we need to start thinking about now. One other key thing that really stuck out for me was the stakeholder consultations. And I must be honest, as far as this one is concerned, I don't think that we had given appropriate thought to civil society consultations as far as the data privacy laws and all that are concerned. And this is a key takeaway, I think, for me. And again, this is something that I think needs to take center stage in our roadmap. those are really the two things that I'd like to mention. I'm happy to take any further questions if there are other related to this. But as I've said earlier on, we are seeing so many similarities between the different presentations. It might be repetitive if I try and go through the entire thing now.
No, definitely. Yeah, I also saw similarities from my prepared answer to Beryl's team's presentation. So I definitely understand. But I think then I'd want to ask you from other countries, because in discussions with you, you shared some research from other countries and the eKYC processes that they've rolled out. So what lessons do you think you've drawn that are applicable for the eSwatini case that will help you in this process?
So I have learned a thing or two around how we handle the data privacy. At the moment, we do have our bill currently being debated in Parliament, and certainly there's a lot of work that needs to go around there, sort of engaging civil society and even drafting, I guess, guidelines on who gets to access and who gets to use that data and for what purposes. I think that is one key takeaway for me. The one other aspect I think I'm sort of trying to internalize in terms of lessons learned is just this sort of two options. The one being to sort of leverage of the various existing databases where they sit and trying to bring that all together and sort of get those to meet the KYC need, which is top of mind for us, or the aspect of just creating altogether a financial identity that will fulfill the needs that the central bank is concerned about, which would be the KYC, the AML monitoring and all that. So at this moment, I think we are sort of, you know, at that point where we probably need to make a decision. This is a key turning point around the direction that we would need to go. I am leaning more towards, at the moment, as far as the engagements have gone, towards trying to bring together all these fragmented databases and not really try and have a standalone project being run by the central bank. I'm appreciating the discussions around how this is a multi-stakeholder type project, best led, I guess, by central government. A lot of the benefits to the country as a whole, to government, have been well articulated. And certainly for me, I think that is probably, or rather the motivations for doing it that way have stood out for me quite well. And that is certainly one of the key inputs that I am probably going to make as we progress this project.
Right, thank you for that, Pilire. So yesterday we had our office hours, and we had a question arise from I think it was either Beryl or Kay, I'm not quite sure. And they asked us on your thoughts on the levels of assurance you'd require for the eKYC project to ensure that you still meet the criteria for good ID, protecting the data, making sure that everyone is protected in the system. And can you tell us a bit about that?
So the quick and easy answer would be to say that we would want to see a very high level of assurance being in place. And I think this speaks to probably getting guidelines in place that will start to restrict, you know, or sort of dictate how that data is used and who gets to access it and so on. I think the consultation is also key, because ultimately it is the consumer or the end user that has to have that assurance that their data is, I suppose, safe and being accessed by the appropriate parties and all that. So for me, it's probably two things. There's that stakeholder consultation piece, and then there's also another aspect of making sure that the appropriate guidelines in place that will provide that assurance to our consumers around the ID ecosystem.
All right, thank you so much, Pilire. If there are any questions from the floor to Pilile, please do feel free to raise your hand. And I just want to check in again to see if our other group is ready to present, or we can take questions from the floor. Also, I just wanted to, before then I move on to the questions and waiting for the other group, but then want to hand over the floor to David for a bit so that we can also hear from him on his thoughts from the presentation so far and what he's drawn from that.
So Nawazi, would you like to wait for the other group to see if they're ready, or me to go ahead now, or what is best?
Can you get any indication, Dorregos?
Sounds like they're maybe busy. Maybe they can
Yeah.
submit their presentation to you if they're not quite ready yet, by email, and you could post it. Okay. Well, maybe let me share a few thoughts, Nawazi, as you've invited. Thank you. And again, let me thank the group that has presented and anyone else on this call who has been thinking about this issue during this week. I wanted to start by affirming why we as DFI are doing this. And it's really two things that I hope have come out very clearly. The one is that we really care about applied knowledge, because all the theory in the world isn't worth much unless you can bring it to bear in a specific situation. And obviously, eSwatini has given us that specific situation this week. So we hope that you, as professionals in this area on these journeys, are able to start thinking about all this knowledge, things you may hear on webinars like about MOSIP or about the GSMA solutions. How do they come to bear in a practical situation like eSwatini? And then the second reason is, of course, because of this desire to cultivate a new body of professionals, people like you who are working in these digital areas, cutting across a lot of existing knowledge domains, but thinking hard about what does this mean in your particular countries and societies. And so in some ways, what we've seen this week in a very small form, because it's been time limited, obviously, to this week, is what we hope will happen on a much deeper level within all the countries in which Sarah's digital finance associations that she mentioned earlier in the week are starting up, and where it's possible to have bodies of professionals to whom agencies like the central banks would go and say, help us, give us your input, because they're trusted, not only because of their applied knowledge, but also because of their ethics, the alignment with the overall purpose. So in this case, we've heard from Pelile and from the Central Bank of eSwatini, things like financial inclusion really matter to them. So that's why we're doing this, and it's great to see the thinking that started to come out. And I, again, want to commend the group we've heard, obviously Nawazi, who's pulled this whole thing together, and the Central Bank of eSwatini for being willing to be the kind of guinea pig, so to speak, in the exercise so far. What I want to make just two comments in relation to the case for today, listening to the discussion, all of which makes sense to me as someone who doesn't know eSwatini well, unlike Nawazi and even unlike Sarah, who, as we heard, has lived in eSwatini. The first is, I wonder whether the COVID situation of the last 6 months doesn't give an opportunity for reframing this whole exercise, which has been underway for a while at eSwatini, thinking about digital identity, where suddenly the urgency, but also the scope of the solutions necessary expands potentially. So whereas we've been talking very much around eKYC as if it's an onboarding issue for financial institutions at different levels, of course, it's really just a step in a bigger digital identity journey that takes you into other digital use cases that unlock value in the digital economy of the future that eSwatini will be entering into. And here I'm talking about a whole range of other things, such as the ability to sign digital certificates, to contract digitally, things that build on a base of identification and take it further in directions that today may seem a little bit in the future, but they're coming fast and they've been accelerated. So even as we've talked eKYC, it's in this broader context of an acceleration where the steps that the CBE is taking in this direction could well set a path, a direction that could unlock faster some of these broader aspects of digitization that eSwatini, like everywhere, will have to embrace in the next 10 years. Then secondly, and lastly, just on the specifics of the case itself, you know, in any case study, the real question is, what's the problem, right? And so we've had the problem framed as an eKYC problem. Part of the difficulty in digital identity is that foundational identity, by definition, is trying to solve for a lot of different problems, whereas functional identity, in other words, dealing with one sector, is solving for a more specific set of problems. And what we just heard Pelile mention is a very fundamental choice that eSwatini has to make, or at least the central bank has to make, which is whether to pursue the bigger set of solutions around linking these databases and coming up with a robust foundational identity, or whether to pursue a functional identity. And I want to just dwell on that for one moment because it's relevant to a whole lot of broader things going on in the world. So Pelile mentioned she's predisposed towards thinking of the foundational identity, and we've heard the case made throughout this week by Mosip, also by Yanis, that there is a real need for countries to have a reliable foundational identity. However, just for one moment, let me make a counter case. And the case isn't that you don't need a foundational identity. The case is the path to get there. And here I'd like to use the examples of Nordic countries or even Nigeria as countries where the foundational identity has been coming via the banking system. So in other words, it started as a bank ID solution in the case of Bank ID in Sweden, in Norway, other Nordic countries, Denmark, and it's become recognized over time as the country's foundational ID system, digital ID system. Nigeria is slightly different because there is a national ID system, but it's been slower to roll out in its digital form. And so the BVN, the Nigerian Bank Verification Number, has become de facto that, at least for banked people. So in the case of eSwatini, I think there's something to at least consider, which is to say, if the big solution route around foundational identity ends up taking too long or being too difficult because of coordination issues across databases, maybe, just maybe, there's a case to consider promoting, as the CBE, a functional solution, which might start looking like a KYC utility, where the CBE's role is to set standards and to catalyze a conversation with the financial sector in eSwatini over what does robust verification look like? Because it sounds like eSwatini's main problem is not lack of databases, it's the lack of assurance around some of those databases. It's the lack of verification that's adequate around some of those issues. Now that's very much a public-private issue, because remember, as we've seen in other countries like the UK, even when a government goes ahead and provides a form of ID, like the UK government did in the Verify case, which is now ending, that doesn't mean financial institutions will accept it for their risk purposes. They face other risks in addition to the risk of being held to be not compliant with eKYC. And that might mean that no matter how hard you try, if they don't trust and think the solution's helpful, they're not going to do anything with it. So I think there could be a very fruitful line of conversation around what would a shared utility look like that would cut the costs of due diligence around things like verification of proof of address in eSwatini in ways which really make a lot of sense to financial institutions across the board, telcos as well as banks, and also make sense in eSwatini's regional situation, because eSwatini is part of the Common Monetary Area in Southern Africa, also SADC. All the norms there obviously have to make sense for cross-border institutions that operate in eSwatini. And a conversation around that would be potentially a very fruitful one to have in parallel with perhaps the foundational discussions. And if the foundational discussions end up taking too long, maybe, just maybe, pursuing a solid, reasoned, rational, strong buy-in solution around functional identity first could create a stepping stone towards a broader foundational identity basis in the future. So those few thoughts, that mild provocation coming from examples elsewhere where the functional has become foundational, just as something to think about in the context of eSwatini and maybe elsewhere.
Thank you very much for your points, David. And I like that thinking of looking at it the other way, saying that maybe starting with the functional ID would then lead to ending up with the foundational digital identity system being run, especially as we know that in looking at involving policymakers and government stakeholders, it might take longer to get the foundational ID system in place as opposed to the functional ID that could be in place with the eKYC project, with like the Central Bank of eSwatini, looking at eSwatini as the example. So I'm not sure if the other team will be presenting today, but please feel free to email us your points. I got from your messages that you didn't put it in a PowerPoint presentation, and that's okay. We were just interested to hear on your thoughts and what plan you thought eSwatini would follow. So that is valuable information to share. So you can share with us as your document and just email it to Sarah and myself, and we'll put those together to share with everyone else that they can access them on campus if you're too shy to talk to us today. I think then in closing, I just want to ask if we have any questions from the floor before I move towards that, either to David or to Pilile or myself. And we also do have Sfiso from the Central Bank of eSwatini on this call. So I think if we have any questions, that would it be willing to ask them. I see your question there, Chris Lau. Do you want to ask it out loud yourself? Or would you prefer me reading it from the discussion, from the chat? Chris? Okay, so Chris's question, and I'll pose this to you, Pilile, is that or David, when rolling out the digital identity ecosystem, has there been consideration for commercial use cases that are also socially, financially inclusive? This, for example, ID-linked services that could generate revenue for the private sector and or government, whilst also at the same time providing digital inclusion for underserved citizens or populations.
Well, I can't answer that. Oh, Pilile, would you like to go ahead for eSwatini? I can only answer it in the general case.
Go ahead, David. I'll pick it up after you.
Okay. Well, so I guess all I would say is in many ways what you were hearing yesterday from Yanis and the GSM Association is an example of largely private players, the mobile network operators around the world who've come together to offer forms of identity service that tends to be built on top of, as you heard yesterday, forms of foundational identity. But then they do offer use cases in which it's possible for revenue to be earned. So there's a very concrete example, and Yanis may be able to comment some more around that. The second is simply to say that one of the strongest use cases in the financial sector for a solid digital identity is simply the reduction of fraud, something which has been mentioned today. I saw it was mentioned in campus. The example I think somebody gave in campus, I believe it might have been Kay, was the example of the US as a country that has very diverse and somewhat patchy digital identity solutions. And the result of that is in areas like card, a higher fraud rate than you find typically in other countries that might have a tighter policed solution. So that is a case not so much for extra revenue as reducing costs, or the cost of fraud in this case.
All right, thank you, David. I see Indrakshi put in the chat that she has a query, but I'll let her go after Pilile has finished giving her response to this question.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, David, for that insight. You know, when I saw the question, I just thought to myself, I often find that there's a bit of a tension or a conflict sometimes between commercial goals or objectives versus, you know, the social, you know, the provision of social benefits or services. And as much as I'm open to the idea, and certainly I think Yanis's presentation yesterday went a long way towards illustrating what this could look like from a private or the point of view of the MNOs. I carry a bit of skepticism, and this is just an opinion around the eventual cost to the consumer or to the users of the services if an initiative such as this one were rolled out purely for commercial or with the overriding objective being commercial or, you know, profit making, so to speak. I don't think that this is necessarily something that we can have a conclusive answer on, but it's perhaps to just point out that is one key aspect that we would need to consider and possibly address, you know, if we wanted to develop further the thinking around other commercial use cases as well.
Thank you very much to both of you, Peter and David, for your answers. Indrakshi, would you like to raise your query? Indrakshi? Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, I have a question for David, and thank you for allowing me this time. I was wondering the concept of consumer information database that we are discussing out here. And we have this concept of account aggregators happening in India. How are they related? I mean, would the concept of account aggregators work for this sort of database also?
Thanks.
Yes.
Let me answer that very quickly. So what you're referring to, I think, is a very particular feature of India's emerging stack, which is actually a very valuable one. And for those who don't know, India has promulgated a particular regulation, in fact, done out of the financial sector for now, which allows for account aggregators who essentially control the consent architecture. So what they do is they allow for consumers to use their services so as to control consent around the use of different types of their profile. That's the particular sense, at least as I understand it, Indrakshi, that India has been applying. And so my answer to you would be, I think that's extremely valuable and extremely important. It's extremely important because we know that the kind of consent-based architecture which Europe has introduced under GDPR that puts all the burden on the consumers to implement effective consent really is not very helpful. It's not effective. People are overwhelmed with consent requests. When's the last time when you were asked, do you accept cookies or something, that you actually go and check on what all the things are behind the cookie, or actually even check what the disclosure requirement is that you consent to, the privacy policy when you go on a website. So the idea of having intermediaries that are specialized in doing that, I think, is in principle a very good idea. And I think it would make a lot of sense if eSwatini, for example, just bringing it to that, were considering a KYC utility or any form of architecture in the financial sector to build a layer which would allow for control of consent in an easier, more effective and practical form.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, David. I think I was just trying to draw a parallel and find out if that works this way also.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And I see Yanis has also posted an answer in the chat. So please take a look at that. Our time is running out, and I just wanted to make a few announcements before our call ends, in that the group activity was for an award, and we'll be announcing the winning team once we can also if we get the input from Dorregos' team, and then decide from there on campus. So please make sure to log on to campus tomorrow to see that announcement. And we'll also be emailing you a link to our feedback form, requesting your feedback on this week and how you felt on the material and any areas you'd like for us to consider to improve, or whether we should run another DID week even next year. So we're really eager to hear your thoughts on that. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Yanis, for being with us. Thank you, Pilide and Sviso, for your contributions as to helping us understand and work on the case study and opening up the Central Bank of eSwatini for us to learn on your process to on your eKYC project. Thank you as well, David, for your valuable input, and Sarah for all the hard work we've done putting up all the posts on campus. I really have thoroughly enjoyed this week. I don't know if, David, you want to say a few remarks before we end the call, and then I'll hand back to you, Sarah.
No, I think you've said it all. Thank you very much to everyone involved.
Sarah?
And once again, just to echo, thank you, everybody. It's been a really interesting week. I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you, and really interesting, David, you know, the idea of creating that layer that allows the individual to have more control over privacy, like a third party being able to manage. That was one of the things that came out of the privacy pop-up discussion that we held back in June. So it's fascinating for me to see how these discussions are beginning to tie together and ideas can cross over between them. So 2021 will definitely come with some more of these groups. Different themes, perhaps we will revisit digital identity again, we hope so. But also we're really interested to hear what other topics you might like to debate and work on some practical case studies on too. So just encourage you again, do fill in the evaluation form. The link will be in the email that comes around to you with the recording, and keep telling us what you want, because we're here to shape activities with you and for you. So we look forward to engaging with you more in the future as well. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon, evening, daytime, and see you all again online on another event soon.